Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Peak and Flow podcast. This is yet again another part of the BSFT30 series, and today we are talking about learning as a process. Now, as boring as it is, I know, really it's about, once again, moving from this sort of all or nothing, black and white approach, and seeing things more on a grey scale, a continuum, a process. And the importance of this is that so often we can allow other people to be learning as a process, yet we struggle to let ourselves do the same thing. Is that we should know it, or that we should know it by now, we should have it by now, other people do, why am I so silly, so stupid, etc., etc. And the goal here today is to talk through some real simple frameworks for you, a couple of principles to take on board that will fundamentally change one's ability to learn, because learning is not something that we finish in school or can only be done in school. In fact, school can commonly get in the way of learning in many ways. So let's talk through that. So a couple of problems that get in the way of people here is that they focus on what they don't know. They either have these beliefs around their intelligence, or they have this idea that they can't move on until they know it or understand it, which is so challenging because that kind of limits their ability to understand it, because you kind of just meet it where you're at. An example of that is if you've ever read something or read a book or even seen a movie or something along those lines, and then you came back to that book, that movie or documentary later on, and you learned something completely different, but it was there the first time round. You just weren't ready to receive that information yet. And that's okay. That's the whole point of growing. It's the same as going into year 7 when you're in year 2 and the information is like, this makes no sense to me, but I can pick up on a couple of things. And then going back to year 2 and then going through the years and going to year 7 when you're meant to go to year 7, and now you can actually start to grasp the information. And so this learning is a process is crucial because it allows us to give ourselves some space and flexibility to approach how we're learning and to approach what we actually are learning, and realize that learning is an unfolding. So one of the biggest fears that can come up for people with this concept is that they're never going to get it. They're going to stay the same. They're never going to get it. I never get these things. I've always been this way. It becomes this set in the ways, stuck in their mind kind of concept. But we have to be able to go and realize that frustration is simply a precursor for learning. One of the biggest lessons for me in this space was understanding that there is no arrival. We can get a certificate, we can get a qualification, we can get that sort of stuff, but that doesn't mean that you've completed the learnings. It means that you can kind of be covered by insurance. That's about it. That's really about it, right? You can go get insurance now, or there's a group of people that will nod their cap at you because you've done the same volume of work that they've done. It doesn't mean that there's formal learnings, there's learning as a process as well, are not important. They really are, for a whole variety of reasons. What it does mean is that the learning you haven't completed the learning by that point. The learning only really starts, it deepens at that point. And I'm going to give you some frameworks that will make more sense of that. So there's no arrival, there's only a deepening. And when we can understand that there isn't an arrival, there's checkpoints, but no arrival, it takes off this pressure to be able to simply just continue chipping away and continue learning, knowing that you're going down a path that's most interesting to you. And here's something that I offer a coach, right? And this is a really good example of it. Do not bother yourself with this idea of being a good coach. Rather, focus more on being an experienced coach. Shift your focus away from wanting to be a good coach to being an experienced coach. Because some people, I've been in the industry for 20 years, some people will be like, wow, Dave's amazing. He's able to do X, Y, and Z. Fantastic. Top tier. Gold standard. Somebody else will meet me and be like, guy fucking knows nothing. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's jargon. It's just ridiculous. He's making it up. These two individuals are that's their opinion. That's their experience of me. If I was to rely on me being a good coach, I'm now trying to manipulate a particular opinion, subjective experience, perspective of me, as opposed to simply just looking at being the student. And the key thing there is that the master is always the student. The master is always the student. To be both simultaneously the master and the student is one of the most powerful places we can be, but in order to get there, we have to be the student. So you're never not the student. And here's the key thing. Imagine having a master hat or a teacher's hat, think of that, and then a student's hat. If you're going somewhere and you're having to swap between the two hats, you actually don't get to learn as you're teaching. You're missing out in doing so. You never take the student hat off. Learning is continuous. There is only a deepening. There is no arrival. Do not concern yourself with being good. Concern yourself with being experienced. And this still feeds into this same concept that you earn what you learn. And what that means is that you get not just earning as in financially earning, but you will. It's actually earning in the sense that you get to keep it. Whatever it is that you're learning, you get to keep that. And people can't take that away from you. And that's what's really crucial from here. And we do that best when we fall in love with curiosity. When we understand that failure is not an event, failure is simply the price of entry in being experienced and being a master at something. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is not the opposite of winning. Failure is simply a cost of entry of playing the game that you're wanting to play so you can become a master, so you can master the skills down the path you are going. So we need to pay attention to really the way that we're framing this in our mind and the way that we're mentally approaching this, and then how we're applying that mind to things like movement, things like nutrition, things like teaching, things like the method, approach, goals, and so forth. So really it's a lot to do with self-awareness, and so often people get stuck into this idea that they will say they're self-aware, and then they name all the things that they're aware of, but that's not their self, that's their personality. And you are not your personality. You do personality, because personality is not something that we have. Personality, persona, is literally derived from the Greek word mask. Persona is to do with a mask at the drama that we're at. The persona that we play is actually how we interact with reality to be able to meet the things or the needs that we have on the inside. And so we develop a personality, and that personality is neither good nor bad, but the more that we identify with that personality, the less self-aware that we are. And the more that our personality has us, and it feeds back into Carl Jung's quote of, do people have ideas or do ideas have people? And it feeds into this idea of, do you have values or do those values have you? Where's your flexibility based on the context of your life and the context of the life conditions around you? So self-awareness and personality awareness are not the same thing. And more on that, I'm sure, in later podcasts. But there's a really key lesson in that. So let's have a look at a couple of frames here. There's going to be two, and I've already mentioned two anyway, which is basically curiosity and compassionate curiosity, and also that failure is the cost of entry. So failure is not a person, it's an event, and it's a cost of entry in pursuing something that's meaningful. The other part there is that bringing curious compassion to any given situation as opposed to harsh judgment allows you to really lean in and learn from multiple perspectives and deepen your learning of whatever it is that you are learning. So those two are really crucial. If we can hold those two in mind as we do this, then we can fundamentally fast track or stop slow tracking our learning. But I want to give you two frameworks for levels of learning. There's one called the conscious competence scale, and what this is that you start off as unconscious incompetent. You're not sure, or you just don't know what you're not good at. The example is like driving. When you're waiting to get your license, you're sitting there watching your parents drive, and you're like, looks friggin' easy. And then you become consciously incompetent. You become aware of how incompetent you are at driving when you start driving. And so from that, we start to, if we allow ourselves this consciously incompetent thing, like, I'm not very good at this. It's like, you've done 4 fucking reps. Of course you're not very good at it. You've got to keep practicing, and conscious practice, not just unconscious practice. That's why it needs to be deliberate. But conscious competence means that I have to focus, but I can competently do it. It takes a lot of my attention and energy. That's fine. That's a normal process, a normal part of the process of learning. So we move from unconscious incompetence, don't know what I'm not good at, to conscious incompetence, man, I'm not very good at this, to conscious competence. So just quickly on that, the conscious incompetence is where we definitely need curious compassion. Because if we have curious compassion in that space, we'll move through, right? We'll move through and start to continue to develop the skill. But if we bring harsh judgment to consciously incompetent, we'll never move forward. And that's where the black and white stuff happens. So we move past black and white when we move to consciously competent. And then the stage after that is actually unconsciously competent. And these are the things that you do exceptionally well, and you don't even know how you do it. They become second nature, inverted commas. When they're not second nature at all, it's probably more like second nurture. But the key thing is that you've done them so often that they're just a part of your DNA. It's just a part of who you are. It's just part of something you've done for so long. Maybe this is in relation to your children. Maybe it's in relation to your sport. Maybe it's in relation to your work or your study. It definitely is. If you've driven somewhere before and you just arrive somewhere and you're like, I know that I drove here and I was awake, but did I drive through that stop sign? You just unconsciously drove to where you went to, and you may have still checked mirrors and blinkers and all that sort of stuff, but you just ran on autopilot and you did it fine. That's your unconscious competence. The beauty is that there's a level above that called conscious unconscious competence, and in that is actually how do we teach this? And so that's a big part of what I do. I teach people, and a lot of bringing out this course actually was me going, actually, how do I do this? Is bringing conscious awareness to the things that we do unconsciously well. And so our ability, that's actually called teaching, by the way. So teachers that are actually teaching, this is why athletes stop at unconscious competence. Coaches go to the next stage and they become consciously aware, or they can bring it out in the athlete of what they do unconsciously well. So that's the conscious competence scale. You have another scale here, which is across the quadrants, which is Ken Wilber's work, but to keep it simple, there's 4 stages of it. 1 is know of, 2 is know about, 3 is relate with, and 4 is embody. And so in this space is that when you first learn of something, and this is actually like the conscious incompetent space, right? Because unconscious incompetent, you don't know of it, so it's unknown, unaware. So know of is that you're able to, you've heard of it, but you can't go into detail of it whatsoever at all. You can't relate with it. To know about means you're familiar with it, you've heard a bit about it. You could, maybe if you Google it, you might be able to understand it a little bit, but you know about it. You can't actually relate with it. You've never done anything with it. Relate with is your ability that you've actually interacted with it. Maybe you've got people around you that have interacted with it. Maybe you're learning with it. You're starting to relate with it, which actually is relationship, which is the process of continually relating, which means learning as a process. So you're building a relationship with this particular skill, intelligence, whatever it is that we want to call it. And then the last one is embodiment. And with coaching, through the coaching room, one of the key things that Joseph said there, one of the directors of the coaching room, he said, you coach and you coach and you coach and you coach until you get to the point where you no longer coach and coaching just happens around you. And it kind of is an odd thing to say and probably hear, but it's also just not. It's quite poetic. And here's the example I so often give with this is that if you were part of a run club and every Friday morning you met at the same spot, 6 a.m., and you went for a run every Friday morning. And you've done it for 4 weeks in a row, everyone does their run, bit of fun. And on the 5th week, you rock up and David Goggins is there. And David Goggins is there and he doesn't have to say anything. He's like, hey guys, keen to go for a run, motherfuckers. Like, off he goes and he's swearing, whatever. And my guess is everyone on that run would run harder. David Goggins didn't do anything. He just embodies it. And so he didn't do it. It just happens around him. And so that's the kind of level you want to get at as far as deepening your knowledge and understanding and mastery. And so learning is a process. It's not something where we just arrive. It's not that we don't get it until we get it, then we just know it. You actually move through these stages. Everyone does with all things that we learn. It can come online, but to actually know it is to get it into your system. And when I mean into your system, I mean into your neurology, your neurosemantic system, into your body and into your mind. And if you're able to do that and you accept where you're at, you open up your potential. And it sounds corny, I know, but what it means is that this rigid idea of I should know or I shouldn't know, or you know it or you don't know it, stops your actual potential in any capacity. If you give yourself permission to be okay with the process, then you stop focusing on the destination and you start focusing on the learning. And that is fundamentally where you fast track your learning big time, because your focus is no longer on what's the outcome. Its focus is now on what's the process, and funnily enough, you get to your outcome faster. And if you take this all on board, you outgrow the old you and you'll lean into actually what's possible for you. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. If you can see learning as a process, you'll outgrow the old you that's probably holding you back a little bit and probably holding you in a space that once worked for you. But my guess is if you're listening to this, isn't working for you right now. And in doing so, it's tough, it's hard, it's murky. But if you can let go of that, you can truly lean into your potential. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And on that note, team, I'm done. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend. This is part of the BSFT30 it is part of the BSFT30 process. Podcast series is part of the BSFT30 program. It's a free program that I run every single month. You can find out more in the show notes. Heaps more to come, but that's me done. I'm out. Until next time, peace and pizza. I'll see you soon.